Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us at this Better Work Network event, which is funded by Trust for London. At this event, we're going to be looking at what works to support people to progress from low pay. We know that the pandemic has triggered one of the worst job crises in recent decades, and it's widened inequalities, hitting London particularly hard. We need to make sure that the groups that have been most affected by the pandemic and its economic impacts benefit from the recovery, and that we don't end up building back worse. So part of that is making sure that there are good quality jobs available and that people have opportunities to progress into them. We're going to be drawing on some of the work that we published last year with the Social Mobility Commission, looking at the impact that training has on people's ability to progress in work. And we're going to look at what works more widely to support low-paid workers to progress, and the way in which the pandemic has impacted on access to training opportunities, and then what some of the lessons are for providers and policymakers in the capital. I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel. We've got Michelle Cuomo-Bora, who's Director of Skills and Employment at the Greater London Authority. We've got Nicola Hay, who's Chair of the Association of Employment and Learning Providers, London's Advisory Board. And then we've got Karima Chandika, who's Head of Skills and Emerging Talent at Thames Water. Just to say that you can pose questions throughout the event via Slido. We're recording this event, and so we'll share that the recording after the event. And an overview of the report that we'll be talking about today is available on our website. So I'm just going to quickly run through the findings from the report that we published last year before passing on to our panelists. So the report that we published last year with the Social Mobility Commission and NISA and the Centre for Vocational Education Research at the LSE looked at the impact that adult education and training has on progression from low pay. We analysed a series of longitudinal surveys to track people's progression and look at the kind of different factors that impact on people's ability to progress out of low pay. We were looking specifically at adults, so people over 25, and our definition of low pay looks at earnings below 2/3 of the median in any given year. So Mintra, if I could have the next slide. We know that low pay remains a kind of continuing problem in the UK labour market, with over 1 in 7 workers currently in low paid jobs. And we know that relatively few low paid workers progress onto higher pay. Many of them kind of get stuck in low pay or cycle in and out of low pay. A quarter of those who were low paid in 2006 remained in low pay 10 years later. And here we're just looking at pay for people who have got stuck in low pay, those who have cycled out of in and out of low pay, and those who have escaped low pay over that decade. And we can see that workers who get stuck in low pay have substantially lower pay than others. So we wanted to test whether workplace training and adult education, which has long been seen as a route to kind of higher wages and better opportunities, whether that really did enable people to move out of low pay. So if we can have the next slide, we know that a range of factors influence the chances of somebody escaping low pay. Workers generally more likely to escape low pay if they're younger, if they live in London. We know that from kind of previous research that there does seem to be a kind of escalator effect in the capital, where people are more likely to progress onto higher earnings. You're also more likely to progress if you're from a privileged background and work in a professional occupation. And if you're a white international migrant, that was shown to be a factor too. Once we take kind of all of these kind of various demographic kind of individual and job characteristics into account, we know that actually there are several key factors that play or have a significant influence on people's chances of progressing from low pay. That includes not having any children, being younger, holding level 2 qualifications, again, living in London. And then we also found that training also was a significant factor in terms of people's chances to move and likelihood of moving out of low pay. If I can have the next slide, Mincha. This slide effectively just kind of summarizes what we saw in the longitudinal data in terms of the likelihood of somebody escaping low pay by the total number of training days they undertook, controlling for all of the kind of other factors like their individual and job characteristics. And we don't want to overplay the impact that training has, because actually compared to other factors, it has a relatively modest impact. But we can see that the chances of escaping low pay increase slightly with each one extra training day. So if we scale that up, the chances of somebody escaping low pay are 8 percentage points higher for somebody who completes at least 150 training days over this 8-year period. And you can see from this chart that somebody completing at least 900 days of training has a probability of more than 75% of escaping low pay. So the impacts are modest, but it does affect the chances. Training does affect the chances that somebody will escape low pay. We also know, if we go to the next slide, that the likelihood that low paid workers will participate in training in the first place is really quite variable. And we found 3 significant predictors of participation when accounting for all of those other characteristics. And that was higher prior qualification levels, being female, and living outside of London, interestingly. We also found that individuals with parents from more privileged backgrounds are substantially more likely to participate in training. And so we've got patterns that actually are working to reinforce inequalities and limit social mobility overall. The next point, if we go to the next slide, is that the impacts also differ according to the type of training that somebody's undertaking. So we used kind of Leo data here to look at kind of levels of progression and the extent to which people were escaping out of low pay by the kind of level of qualification that an adult was undertaking, the subject, and the number of kind of guided hours that were involved in training. And we can see that the impacts vary according to the level that somebody's of training that somebody's undertaking. So low paid adults who are undertaking degrees were twice as likely to escape low pay compared to those undertaking entry level courses. So around 55% of those undertaking at least a level 3 qualification would progress out of low pay, compared to around 25% of those undertaking entry level or level 1 qualifications. And we also saw that the chances of escaping low pay increased as workers studied courses with more learning hours too. So you know, the impacts will vary according to the type of training and the length of training courses too. So if we go to the next slide. So we know that amongst a range of factors, training can increase the likelihood of that low paid workers will progress in work and escape low pay. But we also know that not everybody has access to training, and some groups are far more likely to undertake training than others. And then thirdly, we know that kind of not all training is equal, and the impacts that training has vary according to the type of training and the length of training that somebody is undertaking. In terms of the recommendations that we set out in the report, the first looks at the way in which this lifetime skills guarantee, which is obviously featured in the Queen's speech yesterday, can benefit low paid workers. And that's about encouraging participation in courses that are likely to lead to opportunities to progress in work, and also providing people with support for some of the other costs associated with learning, and making sure that we've got flexible learning opportunities available, because we know that the costs and time are two of the kind of key barriers for particularly low paid workers in undertaking training. The second was to address some of the inequalities in apprenticeships. So we know that kind of access and participation in apprenticeships is quite uneven. So we need to use those as a tool to enable people to train and learn it and progress in work. Thirdly, this has to sit within a kind of overall lifelong learning strategy that has a focus on progression. And so that's about aligning existing funding streams so that we've got a kind of unified system, and positioning investment in skills alongside investment in jobs and training. It's also tailoring employment and progression support to individuals, because we know from all of our research that that's incredibly important and will impact on the chances that somebody finds work and is able to progress in work. And then lastly, I think as as we kind of roll out new initiatives and new policies, we need to continue to find and test ways to improve support for low paid workers through evaluation and mechanisms for sharing good practice. So I'm going to leave the presentation there and pass straight to Michelle, who's going to focus on the role of the adult education budget and the role that plays in training and progression. Great.
Hi, and thank you for that introduction, Naomi. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to give you a quick run through of some of the work that we will be carrying out over the next few years, and also how we see in progression being absolutely fundamental in terms of recovery over the next few years. So I could have the next slide. So I think we've already heard what the key issues and challenges are from Naomi already this morning. We know that London continues to have high levels of poverty, exclusion and inequality, but we also know that Londoners have a better chance of progressing than other parts of the country, mainly due to the opportunities that the city has. However, being in London isn't a magic pass for many people. Opportunities are not equally shared, and many Londoners remain outside of work or outside of good work, where they're paid below the London living wage or on 0 hours contracts, or the various other plethora of things that limit progression opportunities. We know that low skills and low pay persist, and we know that around 20% of all Londoners are earning below the London living wage, and that is probably likely to increase. We know that certain groups are overrepresented in this, and some of our ethnic minority groups are of a high proportion, as well as young people, women and disabled Londoners. So we know that there are areas we need to tackle there. We know that COVID has had a significant impact. So if we had challenges before COVID, we've got even more challenges coming out of COVID, and that is going to be a significant barrier to progression for many Londoners. The pandemic has seen an increase in unemployment, and we're projecting that to grow over the coming months. We also know that despite having some of the best FE providers, training providers in the country, the system is still fragmented and it's still underfunded. And there is a significant risk as European social funding declines and ends that London doesn't receive that funding back in other forms such as the UK SPF. Sorry, next slide. So despite all those challenges, we're doing a number of things and have already done a number of things to help progression in London. Since the Mayor took over the adult education budget in 2019, which is only a year and a half ago, although it feels like much longer than that, we've introduced a number of things. So the first thing we introduced was full funding for those earning below the London living wage. As recognition, as we've heard already, that training can support people to progress. So really targeting those people, as well as targeting people that with sign language and other things. We've increased flexibility for non-formula funded learning, recognising that that can also support people. It isn't necessarily about full qualifications, but it's about the support that goes around that as well. And we've also introduced, or will be introducing from September, the London factor, which is effectively a base rate uplift, but that is also looking at progression. And in the wording of that uplift, we talk about progression and the importance of that. We've also launched £32 million Good Work for All Fund, and we're currently going through the bids for that. But again, that's focusing on specific sectors where we believe there are opportunities, not just for jobs, but opportunities for good jobs and progression opportunities within that. And of course, the National Skills Fund came in April, and that has a level 3 offer as well. If I can go to the next slide. We're also at City Hall looking at a number of recovery missions, and you'll know that if you've been involved in any of the work over the last few months, that there are 9 recovery missions focusing on a range of social and economic outcomes. And actually skills is really the bedrock of pretty much all of those missions in different ways. The 2 missions that are very specifically focused on skills in relation to work and progression are the Helping Londoners into Good Work mission and the Digital Access for All mission. Digital Access for All kind of says does what it says on the tin. We want to improve people's basic digital skills to enable them to participate in society, but also to enable them to move onwards and upwards in terms of the jobs that they're able to access. In terms of the Good Work mission, there's two key areas within that. The first one around the no wrong door, so really starting to tackle that fragmented skills and employment system for Londoners, enabling people literally to have no front door, no wrong door, to enter into the system and hopefully gain the skills that they need to progress or get into work. The academies are going to focus on 4 key sectors, possibly 5, with the addition of hospitality joining the creative industries, green, digital, and I always forget one, health and social care. And those again will be focusing on getting people into work, working with employers, working with all of the various bodies within that to get people into work, or those that are in work to progress through as well. So if I go to the last slide. And then we're looking much longer term. So the missions are almost the immediate reaction over the next 3 years, but the Mayor wants to set out his adult education roadmap. And this will really be setting out the long-term direction of travel for adult education in London, focusing on getting people into work, focusing on lifetime skills and lifetime learning, and focusing on progression, whether that's progression within work or progression within learning opportunities. We'll be doing some consultation on that over the summer, and we're really keen to hear people's views as well before that being published in the autumn. That roadmap will focus on 3 key areas: local relevance, impact, and access. And that's a very quick whirlwind of what we're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm going to pass straight on to Nicola, who's going to focus on the role that employment and training providers can play in supporting low-paid workers in London.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today on the subject. It's really close to my heart. First of all, I'd like to say is that the analysis in the Learning Ladders report really tallies very much with what I've experienced as someone running an independent training provider for many years myself. I'm now at SDA, where we have over 12,000 apprentices, all ages across the country. I can personally testify to this correlation between the amount of training an adult receives and the chances of escaping low pay. I think apprenticeships play a really key part in addressing this low pay and that whole progression, but we'll explore that a bit further as we go through. It was also good to see the report recognition of the importance of holding at least a level 2 qualification, something which I think the government seems to have lost sight of in its champion of higher level technical qualifications, despite it trying to level up and talking about levelling up the agenda. So I think, again, the level 2 qualification and below plays a really key role in supporting progression. As far as skills training is concerned, there are several government funded programmes which can provide a really positive impact on improving a person's pay. I want to talk about apprenticeships and the adult education budget. But we shouldn't forget there are also traineeships for young adults, the ESF programmes, which are now being replaced by Community Renewal Fund, and eventually the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Some of these are devolved. Michelle has spoken how the devolved programmes can benefit the needs in different regions, including London. The latest addition to the programme offer is the lifetime skills guarantee that Michelle just mentioned, which will begin in April with the first level 3 qualification entitlement for adults. Providers are also bidding to run new skills boot camps around the country. I see the digital boot camps being a massive game changer. We've talked about how basic skills in digital can support people into sustained employment. If you look at the employment these days, you need to have those basic digital skills. So I see that playing a really key role in supporting those furthest away from the job market. Stephen Evans was perhaps right, though, to refer to an alphabet soup of initiatives when he spoke at the Out London event on Monday. And I think we need to be careful and make sure that we're building on programmes that have shown they work, and using providers that have shown they deliver that high quality, responsive training, learning that supports people to progress into work, up once they're in work, and to increase their pay. So coming back to the report's kind of references to level 2, let me first flag up what's happening with apprenticeships at entry level. In the year 2014-15, there were 298,000 apprenticeship starts at level 2. Last year, there was just 99,000. And whilst the pandemic and the lockdown would have had a severe impact on the second half of 1920, it's just worth noting that starts have fallen by about 144,000 previous year, half of what they were in 14-15. I could spend a long time explaining the reasons behind these huge decline, but most delegates will know that the way the levy funding system works is the principal cause. In a nutshell, the large levy pay employers are more inclined to use their levy for higher level apprenticeships for existing staff members. Most of them have long escaped probably low pay, if indeed ever experienced it. The amount of levy funding left for SMEs, who tend to employ proportionally more kind of apprentices at entry level, has been heavily restricted since the levy was introduced in 2017. While my support for the levy in principle remains really strong, I am among those who feel that its way of working needs to be rebalanced to generate more starts for young people and at lower levels. Apprenticeships are about improving workforce productivity, but it would be tragic if we lost the capacity to increase social mobility and diversity. At the same time, employers should be able to retrain and retain the choice to offer apprenticeships to all employees of all ages. As the Chancellor says repeatedly, apprenticeships work. He cites the statistics that 9 out of 10 programme completers stay in sustainable employment. Official data shows that pay prospects are good. In fact, an average, a level 4 completer of an apprenticeship will earn more than a graduate from a modern university. We just need to get the programme start numbers up again. Apprenticeship providers also recognise that more progression for level 2 is needed, but often this does involve discussions with the employer on the higher level positions being open to match individual skills attainment, especially when many of the level 3s stipulate gaining some supervisory skills, which is not always available, particularly in SME organisations. Before I turn to specific programmes for adults, we all know the importance really around numeracy and literacy skills, and increasingly digital skills, as I mentioned earlier, and increasing in individuals' chances of a job with good pay. As Michelle will confirm and has confirmed, Sadiq Khan has made this a mainstay of his skill strategy for London. Yet within an apprenticeship, providers are having to cross-subsidise the teaching of so-called functional skills to young people without GCSEs in maths and English. In fact, they receive less than a third less funding for it than the equivalent teaching in a classroom. The government has been well aware of this injustice for a long time, but despite occasional sympathetic noises, it hasn't really done much about it. Recent forecasts for the economic recovery during the remainder of 2021 have been really encouraging, but nevertheless, the ending of the furlough scheme in September will reveal the scale of a challenge which we have on our hands in terms of helping to find people in new jobs. Here, the 1.4 billion adult education budget, which is roughly split half and half between devolved and non-devolved areas, should be playing an absolutely crucial role in this. Quite frankly, the Treasury must find it quite puzzling to read complaints in the sector press about AEB being halved since 2010 and yet get presented with figures ever showing that FE sector can't spend what's left. Well, in my view and the view of ITPs who have oversubscribed the last AUB procurement in 2017 by 6 times, the budget could easily be spent to improve the prospects of adults both in work and out of work. So in the interest of those livelihoods could be adversely affected by events over the next 12 months, I would urge the DfE and the combined authorities to consider how they can generate better employment related outcomes out of the AUB allocations. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nicola. If I can hand straight over to Karima.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for your time today. I wanted to sort of share, I guess, an employer's perspective on what we've been doing in investing in colleagues. And I'm going to talk specifically around investing in our existing colleagues. And I wanted to share why it's important to us, what we've been doing, and also how hopefully encourage others to do the same. The summer of last year, our business embarked on a journey, and we looked at really how can we start to think about skills from a long-term perspective. And as part of that, this year launched our first ever skills strategy that really sets us up for the next 5 to 10 years. There's a number of principles within the strategy looking at how we build a talent pipeline into our business through our education sector and our community engagement, how we establish strategic partnerships working with FE, HE and the education sector, and how we lead the way within industry for both our supply chain and the sector itself. But one of the principles I just wanted to focus on for the purpose of this morning is our principle around creating this culture of lifelong learning across the business. Thames Water for many years have invested in colleagues, and we have a very well established learning and development function within the team, already offering a variety of training opportunities. But what we really wanted to explore through this strategy was how we could focus on this culture, which is quite an important word there, of lifelong learning. And as you can imagine, there's a number of elements I could discuss with you today, but in the interest of time, I wanted to just pull out 3 that we felt were really important that we were addressing as part of this agenda. And one is the untapped workforce. People that are in our business, in jobs, in roles, but have the skills and ability to do a lot more, and maybe we're not utilising or maximising their potential to the full. The second was in-work poverty. And I think pre-pandemic, we had relatively stable employment levels that I believe masked the fact that there were people in employment but still experiencing poverty. And I think that will only be exacerbated as we now come out of COVID. So how do we really tackle in-work poverty? And finally, promoting good work. So how could we ensure people were better off? How could we, for example, ensure people worked more flexible hours or less hours or reduced hours, earning the same pay, but the result being that they would be able to reduce childcare costs, as an example. So really thinking more flexibly in terms of the offering. We know investing in our colleagues is not only the right thing to do, but we know that it will build our workforce talent for the future. But it also ensures that we have a really engaged and productive workforce. So wanting to be an employer of choice, wanting to be a responsible employer, it's really important that we take this leading role. We know that it will therefore in turn improve social mobility, bring in socio-economic diversity, and ensure that all of our colleagues have the opportunity to learn, to develop. And we know that knock-on effect that they can have in terms of future generations. And I share this story when I can, so I'm going to share with you Richard's story, as I call it. And many years ago in the world of apprenticeships, we had an annual graduation and award ceremony. And Richard went onto stage, collect his certificate. It was a level 2 apprenticeship, and he was in his late 40s. And Richard, when he came off stage, came to me and said, that was great. And you know why it was great? It's because I helped my son with his maths homework for the first time last week. So the fact that we know will have this wider impact in society, not only for Richard's experience and his ability to be more productive and earn more money and progress, but also the impact they're having much broadly. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a context to why we believe this is an important agenda and why we're investing in our colleagues to create this culture of lifelong learning. I want to share now just some practical examples of activities that we're developing to make sure that we achieve this successfully. And one of them is focusing really around engagement. We've got to invest in our leaders within our business to understand what we mean by creating a culture of lifelong learning, to ensure that they understand this is about it being inclusive and about it being available for all. We've then got to create the time to allow people to learn and develop and ensure that it's available for all. So we are investing in training and courses that range from literacy, numeracy, digital at very entry basic level, right up to accreditations, including level 2, 3, 4, and 5, and also some degree apprenticeships. We're also looking at how we make it easy and accessible. So not only do we have a mixed blend of online and face-to-face, but how do we think about the hours of delivery? How do we think about the timing of delivery? How do we think about the days that we deliver this? And then we also want to tell our story across the business. We do find with some of this that we found in our business is there is a stigma attached. So how do we start to remove the stigma that might be associated with learning, whatever that may be, entry level or not? And how do we start to use storytelling as a way across the business to engage our colleagues around the great work that has been done and the benefits that people are wreaking? And then just to finalise, I guess, this word engagement, it's our leadership team that we've really got to bring on the journey. We need them to ensure that they're buying into this and unlocking those opportunities for our colleagues across the business. And the other two areas that are also really important to make sure that this is really practical, the second is partnerships. And we know we can't do this alone. And in the last few months, we've built and engaged a number of organisations and created a number of partnerships. And actually what that has enabled us to do specifically for our existing colleagues is increase our apprenticeship offer, which previously for existing colleagues was one apprenticeship, I believe at a level 4. We now offer over 10 apprenticeships ranging from level 2 to level 7 for existing colleagues. And the final element is our sort of long-term plan. We see our extended workforce, the workforce within our supply chain that we also have a responsibility for. So we're looking to roll out shared apprenticeship schemes and a number of other initiatives across our supply chain to ensure that all people that have an impact on our estate have the benefit of learning and development. So a real collaborative approach with our supply chain. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into our journey, why we've embarked on it, why it is important to us. And I guess for those employees that are listening today, most of you, if not all of you, will be struggling with a skills gap that is very real for us today, and we know that will continue to grow. Most of us, if not all of us, are struggling to recruit the right people with the right skills. So let's make the most of investing in our colleagues that are there already. Let's make the most of ensuring that we engage with our workforce, we create a productive workforce. Because we know by creating this culture of lifelong learning, by investing in our colleagues, we are ensuring that everyone gets a fair opportunity. We believe we can really reduce the social mobility divide and make a real difference, not only in our business, but society and the communities that we serve. And as you know, wanting to be a responsible employer, we really believe that it's our role and we've got to play an active part in that agenda. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Karima. It was really interesting to hear the three quite different perspectives there. So we've had a few questions in from the audience. I want to pick up firstly on kind of point you were raising, Karima, about engagement. So how do you engage people in learning and training in the first place? We know from our work that one of the biggest reasons people aren't participating in learning or training is firstly kind of not wanting to, and secondly time. So I'd be really interested in your thoughts about how we go about addressing that. Karima, if I can come to you first, and then Nicola and Michelle.
Absolutely. So I think we had a bit of a benefit, if I'm honest, at Thames Water. I said in my presentation there that we started sort of this work last year to understand what is our long-term skills strategy. And as a result of that, we spoke to over 70 colleagues across the business to get their input. And we found that there was a real appetite for wanting to learn and develop, but we hadn't created the enablers to allow people to do that. And we hadn't created the right environment to enable that to be successful. The other element that also came out, which we were quite surprised at, and I'm quite new to Thames, so it was quite refreshing to hear it, but I think quite surprising, I think, for a number of individuals, is that we had individuals, or do have individuals in the business that had this stigma with learning. So literacy, digital numeracy were a barrier for them. Some of them couldn't read or write. And actually, how confident and comfortable did they feel coming forward and sharing that with their managers or their colleagues? So with those 2 points in mind, what we've done is set about creating this environment that is inclusive. It's open to anyone. We're using the storytelling, as I said, to really promote the learning, and we're focusing on all levels. So it is literally open to anyone. And we're asking colleagues to come forward and share their stories with others so that people feel comfortable to come forward. I think the other thing about how to engage is, as you just referenced, we've got to make it easy and we've got to make it flexible. So we are looking at courses that are online, courses that are in the evening. They don't run every Tuesday, they run a Tuesday evening or a Thursday morning. You know, just real practical activities to ensure that everybody, no matter what role they are in, they can support. And I think just finally, to finish on that, is that sort of leadership level, engaging that leadership community to ensure that they understand the importance and they are supporting their colleagues in whatever time they need to be part of that and have the opportunity to learn and develop.
Great. Nicola, can I come to you for your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I totally agree with Creamer, and Creamer works with a great employer. I think some of those challenges for some of the SMEs are a bit tougher to provide those flexibilities. But I think for me, it comes back to kind of information, advice and guidance, and making sure that we've really got that offer and joined up thinking, and making sure all our programs are linked. So not losing that focus around the lower levels, so level 2s and below, but making sure that they are flexible enough for people. We mustn't forget mental health and well-being is really important at the moment. So upskilling learning is key, but you have to be in the right frame of mind to do that. And coming out of this pandemic, we know as providers that not only have we been supporting with learning, but also we've been really supporting around mental health and well-being. So I think we need to have a focus around making sure we support individuals with their well-being and mental health. We need to make sure that everyone can get access that need it, the hardest to reach. Disadvantaged groups are still getting access to those level 2 and below programs, that there's joined up thinking about how we can progress people from one program to another, but maintaining flexibility. Kickstart is a really good example. If you're on a Kickstart program, why are we not talking about how you can move to an apprenticeship? If after 4 months you're doing really well on a Kickstart program, and then the employer wants to start supporting you with some additional learning, we should be able to switch that individual then onto an apprenticeship program. But also it might be that we need a level 2 apprenticeship program, and it might need that flexibility we've built into that program around basic digital skills, maths and English. But it's also about employer engagement, and I'm really pleased to hear what Karima was talking about, how she's getting her leaders to set that messaging and the culture down from the top into the business, because I think it's really important when we're talking to employers that we are talking about lifelong learning, and it's not about you do this program full stop. It's about you do this program as part of that ladder to progress within the business, to increase your pay, to increase your skills, be able to move from one business area to another business area. And it's about employers looking at all these different funded programs as solutions to their business, not just about we're putting someone on an apprenticeship or we're putting someone onto an AEB program or a level 3. It's about how does that provide solutions to our business? How does that provide succession planning, widening diversity, bringing in inclusion? So I think ITPs are really good and well positioned to work with employers to promote messages such as Karima is working with Thames Water in engaging their workforce to understand lifelong learning, what that looks like and what that can feel like. But also we're making sure funding supports that, it's flexible enough and it's easy to reach. The learner can get the right programme and the right provider to support them.
Great, thank you. Michelle, what's the GLA's view, and what are the priorities in terms of engagement and kind of access to opportunities?
Yes, I think there's a range of different things that have been touched on by both Karima and Nikki that we're certainly thinking about. I think the most direct link to that is around our academies programme that we're currently developing. And part of that, if you sort of reflect back on the Mayor's Construction Academy, which is the sort of model that we're now taking the learning from and developing further across a series of different sectors, is how do we support people not only to go into those sectors, to think about those sectors, but how do we then support the employers who are in those sectors to establish the good work practices that have been talked about from Thames Water. So as part of that academies programme, what we're looking at is a range of support to those businesses to help them establish those good working practices, but also to Nikki's point, seeing that that's actually good for your business to be doing those things. It's not going to be detrimental to the bottom line. Actually, it's going to enable you to retain staff for longer. It's going to enable them to move through and progress into different roles, help your retention, help all those other things. So we're certainly looking at that from both the employer perspective, so what's in it for the employer, as well as going, well, we know for these Londoners, this is actually what we need to be happening. We need them to be progressing. We need them to be learning. We're also looking in our academies programme, not just at it being a hard job outcome that we sort of measure and go, great, we've got someone into work, but actually there's a range of other things. Apprenticeships are a fantastic it is a job. You're learning at the same time. So how can we support that through that programme as well? Not just getting people directly into those straight jobs. Some of the other things we're doing as well, I suppose, is the careers hubs. We'll be launching those soon. That's an extension of the Learning Enterprise Advisors Network over the next few years, working with employers to go into other schools and colleges to talk about the various career paths and how different qualifications or skills are required for those career paths and what you need to do to get yourselves there. So again, careers being really important at sort of underpinning a lot of the activity that we talk about today. If you can't see where the career path is going to lead you, why on earth would you do a qualification in it, which potentially you might have to invest in as well, depending on the area you want to look at. I also mentioned the adult education roadmap earlier, and we're going out to consult around a range of different things about how we can look at enhancing some of the excellent activity that's already happening in London. We're really keen to use some of the absolutely excellent practices of some of our providers by introducing different learning settings. So we've already mentioned some communities are particularly hard to reach, either they're employed or they're unemployed, and are there different ways of teaching, which some of our organisations are already doing and brilliant, but can we sort of spread that learning across our other providers? How do we make sure that the learning setting is the right place? Is that a community centre? Is that somewhere completely different? Is it an employer's premises? Different times of learning. We've already spoken about some SMEs. They're not going to be able to let their staff leave during the middle of the day. How can we make sure that we've got this sort of 24-hour learning culture, which I think Andrew Lammy always talks about when he gets in touch with us? How are we going to look at night schools? How are we going to look at different platforms? Again, the pandemic, I think, has actually enabled, well, providers are already doing that to a certain extent. So how can we enhance that where it's not happening? How can we use the best practice that's happening in some providers and share that across others to really make sure that we're giving everybody the opportunity to engage? And I think the final thing that we're very clear about is that the community voice, and there's different types of communities, whether that's employer communities, business communities, or whether that's your sort of local community in which you're engaged in. Their voice is absolutely key in all of this. And I think that's something probably City Hall hasn't done quite as well. We've certainly listened to business. Whether we've listened to those communities about why they're engaging or why they're not engaging is absolutely imperative in how we take some of this activity forward and how we engage people that so far haven't been engaged throughout all of this.
Right. And there's another question around the impact of the pandemic and the ways in which that's kind of highlighted the importance of good work. And I think all of you have touched on this in various ways. I mean, we know from our research that low-paid Londoners are twice as likely to have been furloughed through the pandemic, and 4 times as likely to have lost their job. I think there is a big question. Obviously, at the moment, a lot of the policy focus is on the kind of unemployment crisis and thinking about the end of the furlough scheme. But what do you think should be the kind of priorities in terms of good work in the capital, and what role can training play in that? This kind of last big question there. Karima, can I come to you first for?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess if I take the spin around your reference to all these schemes to support and get people back, and Nikki mentioned Kickstart, I think what we've got to do is create the ability for people to reskill or upskill, because there are jobs and there will be jobs, but there will be different jobs. And where I think people have the barrier is maybe an expectation to go back into the sector that they've come from, that maybe might not be as buoyant as it was before. So how are employers unlocking the opportunities and offering the opportunity, being open to and open-minded to that reskilling or upskilling to allow people to move between sectors and thinking about those transferable skills. So I think that's really, really important. In terms of that reference to good work, I think we just need to be more flexible. Even I've gone out and recruited a couple of colleagues recently, and we haven't got the tick box that says this could be a job share or part-time. We have a tick box that says it's either full-time or part-time. So we're not even, we're not creating the infrastructure around how do we as managers, when we go out to recruit and resource, have at the front of our mind the opportunity that it could be a reskilling, it could be a retraining, it could be X, Y, and Z, and we're open to job shares and things like that. So I think there's something around, industry really taking a different approach, and the pandemic getting you to see things in a very different light, being more flexible than I think we ever have been before.
Great. Nicola.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Karima. Just really building on that. So for me, information, advice and guidance is absolutely key. And we need to get it right now, because, in 6, 7, 8, 9 months will be too late. So I think we need to act now. I think we need to be really clear what our offer is to these individuals, hardest to reach, potential redundancy, unemployed, needing to reskill. They need to understand what's out there for them. We need to make sure the offer is really clear. I think we need to make sure we're really joined up. So we're just talking about Kickstart, for example, but you need to know how you can go from a traineeship program to an apprenticeship to higher skills. But that is also coming back to working with employers. And I think one of the things that ITPs are really good is working with employers. And working with employers to look at workforce planning and people development in their business. What does that look and feel like? And can you think differently? So Karima quite rightly was saying job share. And sometimes when we go in and talk to employers and we're talking to them about the workforce planning, we're kind of asking, well, where are those jobs that you can't fill? Where are those jobs that you aren't getting individuals internally progressing into? Why is that? Could we be using the apprenticeship standards to support that retraining, that reskilling, to help those move into those gaps? So rather than you constantly recruiting, driving to find and fill those gaps, actually, can you move people around internally rather than making them redundant? But also looking at that workforce planning to bring individuals in from all different backgrounds at different levels. So making sure we've got strong programs to bring people in at level 2. So, we keep harping on, it's really important that we have a level 2 option for young people and adults to get into work, but then working with those employers to progress them up and provide those progression routes once in work. So for me, the GLA play a really key part with their careers hubs about bringing those partners together and making sure our offer is really joined up, you know, if we're working with DWP, they need to know what providers have got apprenticeship opportunities, that those individuals that might not stay with that employer and are looking after their 6-month placement, looking for a new role again, actually can they progress onto an apprenticeship. So it's about that whole joined up planning, collaboration, partnership. But to do that, you've got to have a really strong base of educators to educate everybody. So your work coaches at DWP need to understand the offer. What is it? What does it look like? Not just for Kickstart, but for apprenticeships, for traineeships, for AEB, for lifetime skills. And so do ITPs and colleges and all the other stakeholders. So it's really key. But we need to act now. We need to move quickly. Because the labour market and unemployment is going to rise and not be on hold until we've got our act together.
Yeah, great. And a very clear message there about joining up across different initiatives and policies. And I guess that relates back to the conversation earlier about this kind of alphabet soup of initiatives. And I guess, be interested to hear too about your thoughts on whether the kind of recent announcements around the kind of skills accelerators and local skills improvement plans perhaps add another kind of additional complicating layer to all of that. Michelle, if I can come to you.
Yeah, so well, I think in my presentation I spoke about fragmentation, and I don't think, despite the rhetoric, we've joined up things, whether that's government, whether that's local government, whether that's regional government. We haven't got there yet. One of the things we want to do is the No Wrong Door programme, which I've spoken about, which is very much about starting to try and join these things up. It is incredibly fragmented. I feel like we've been talking, I spoke at the OUT conference on Monday, I feel like we've been talking about this for probably 20 years and we haven't got much further. And we've gone from putting post-it notes on whiteboards to, trying now, I think, sort of 10 years ago, trying to start to join this together. I think one of the things that the pandemic has done has really brought together the different agencies, whether that is DWP, London Councils, the GLA and others, our skills providers, to say we need to join this up. This isn't about sort of competing departments now. We've all actually got the same objective, to get people back into work, to retrain, reskill, and to make sure that we're offering the best services for our residents. So there is quite a significant work programme around this. The GLA will be investing across this area in the next few weeks, and we do want to start to see the benefits of that. However, you mentioned the Skills Accelerator programme. I think that does add an additional level of complexity, and I don't think it'll be any surprise to anyone on this call that the Mayor was very vocal about the fact he wasn't too happy the fact that we weren't leading that. But I think there are some benefits. I think there's some areas that we need to work through, if I'm honest. We've had lots of discussions with the department about it and the different roles. I still think there's quite a lot missing. Not all learning leads to a job. Actually, we deliver a wealth of learning in London that is absolutely imperative. Nikki's spoken about some of it today around mental health, about social cohesion, about helping people to be able to read and write, to help their children do their homework. That is absolutely critical. And what I don't think at the moment is the Skills Accelerator, where it focuses purely on what sort of businesses want in terms of skills for their work. It actually ignores all of that provision, and we need to be so careful not to lose that and to let that be sidelined through this process. In London, the Skills Accelerator is interesting. There'll be a number of trailblazers. We'll see if London gets one. We're going to put out a document this week which says what we want to see in a Skills Accelerator if businesses want to put, or business groups want to put that forward. The Mayor has a role in signing off any accelerators that get put forward to government, and so we're sort of setting out the parameters of which we'd like to see that happen. It will be no surprise to anyone on this call that will probably reflect the Mayor's recovery programme. So we are trying to align things as much as we can through that. I think the other thing about that is in London, it's very important to recognise that a Skills Accelerator doesn't cover the adult education budget. That is the largest fund in post-19 in London. That's devolved to the Mayor. The Mayor is oversees that and will be making his decisions around how that's spent based on his election, based on his mandate, and based on conversations with people across London as well. So it does make it quite complex, but I think we all have a role to join this up. So employers on one hand and Londoners who we're trying to reach don't feel that fragmentation any worse than they currently are feeling that.
Fantastic. Okay, so we are just out of time. It was a really interesting discussion, and I think one obviously that will continue, and some very clear messages about the role that employers can play, the fact that we need to be continuing to find ways to join things up, and that, you know, good work and supporting people to progress into good quality jobs, and the role that training can play in that, I think came across quite clearly. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. Thank you to the audience for your questions, and particular thanks to the speakers for joining us and sharing your thoughts.